Yes, welcome in. Back for a special episode of the camp as Wisconsin reportedly has its offensive coordinator. That news broke later Friday afternoon. We're doing this Saturday morning. Still hasn't been official, but certainly trending towards Jeff Grimes coming from the hotbed that is Kansas football, one of Jesse's alma maters. And he was only there for a year, but it is a return, I would say, to some of what Wisconsin football has been about.
Very much so. This seems to be everything that Luke Fickell was hinting at on Wednesday, and by then it's clear Fickell had probably a pretty good idea of who the next offensive coordinator would be. But Jeff Grimes, background in knowing how to run the ball, certainly. He's been a run game coordinator, an offensive line coach, and an offensive coordinator for 7 seasons now, and certainly looks like the Badgers have their man.
So when you look into the raw numbers of it, they are look, if you want to have a problem with the hire, you're going to have a problem with the hire. It's not going to be splashy enough for you. It's not going to jump off and hit you in the face like, let's be fair, Phil Longo's hire did. Which I totally get. If you're going to be upset, you're going to be upset. If you're going to like it, you're going to like it. I feel like, and this is asking way too much of people, but I feel like we should just let it maybe play out before we just say it's a horrible hire or a great hire. But the numbers themselves, if you look at the raw numbers, which are not always exactly what is what and what should be what, but he averaged 29 points a game this year at Kansas. They were better towards the end of the season than they were at the start of it. The offense played a role in them winning 3 of the 4 games that they played against ranked teams, not against BYU so much, but certainly against Colorado and certainly against Iowa State. They dropped 45 on Iowa State a couple of weeks ago, and I think it was 532 yards. Iowa State was the number 1 ranked defense in the Big 12. They finished, I think, 18th nationally in scoring defense. And then you also have the 37 they dropped on Colorado, which was more than anybody dropped on Colorado. And people would be like, well, Colorado's defense sucks. They actually improved quite a bit here this second year. But Jeff Grimes himself, whether it was at BYU or at Baylor or now at Kansas, has had good and bad, just like absolutely every offensive coordinator possibly has.
Right. And I'm right with you, Zach. I'm not going to pan the hire, and I'm not going to praise it as the home run hire of the offseason. I think the last couple of years have been instructive of not rushing to judgment because there was so much excitement about Wisconsin shifting away from that pro-style run-first system to whatever variation of the air raid Phil Longo was going to bring. And even if he had success at previous schools, it didn't translate at Wisconsin. And I want to see what this looks like, certainly in spring practice, but as year one unfolds, I do think, though, that he has had some good success running a system that Luke wants to return to here. And Luke talked about it. It's taking advantage of the things that they did well here in 2 seasons under Longo. They've been able to recruit a certain type of player at wide receiver. They're going to play a lot of snaps out of the shotgun still, but having that power mentality, as Luke said, maybe 6 to 10 snaps under center with an ability to go play action. One of the terms that Grimes described about his offense, particularly when he was at Baylor, is the acronym RVO instead of RPO, which is reliable, violent offense. And I think those words probably resonate fairly well with Wisconsin fans who have seen what the Badgers did successfully for so long. But it's not like it's just strictly about the run. They're going to air it out. They're going to take shots. And so this seems to be, it's the blend that Luke was looking for. Now, will it work? Who's to say? But again, I know Kansas fans may be celebrating this because the Jayhawks went into the season as a top 25 team and finished 5-7. But just because it didn't work as well as those people thought doesn't mean it can't work here. And you're right. He's had success. Look at what he did at BYU. They had an 11-1 year where the quarterback was one of the top quarterbacks statistically. And at Baylor, at least the first 2 years, they averaged more than 30-plus points per game. So it has worked.
Yeah, obviously, a lot of people will point to what happened in 2023 at Baylor, where they averaged, I believe, less than Wisconsin, or right around where Wisconsin was at in 2023. Baylor is, it was, and Dave Aranda was on the hot seat. They weren't horrible. Like the rushing numbers, I think they struggled to run the ball in 2023 at Baylor, which I think if you struggle to run the ball in this offense, especially the way that he wants it to be, you're probably going to have struggles all around. But you go and look at the passing stats and the guys that were playing quarterback for him, and Blake Shapen, and Sawyer Robertson. They threw 15 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. They threw for 3,100 yards. But it was gave up a ton of sacks, and they were unable to do the things that they wanted to do. This past year at Kansas, he ran the ball, and I know there's a lot of people like, well, Andy Koltnicki, and then obviously he leaves and the offense starts to suck. But go back, I mean, if you look at what Kansas did this year, they were 43rd in the country in points per play. They averaged 211 yards rushing. That's more than Wisconsin's average in a season since 2019. It was 5.5 yards a carry, which is even better than what Wisconsin averaged in 2019. 2018 was when they had, I think it was +6, just because of what Jonathan Taylor did, obviously. But it is it's an offense that if you are going to be able to run the ball, or if you want to run the ball, I think you're going to have some success. And that is, people were just screaming at us all year, and really all the last, when this hasn't been working, like, you took away Wisconsin's identity. You took away what Wisconsin wants to be. I feel like this is kind of introducing it back into it. And it's apparently not flashy for some people, but because he's an older, not like up and coming OC, but Luke Fickell, and the only surprise here is that he doesn't have like a history with Grimes, but otherwise it fits everything that you would think it would be: an experienced guy that wants to run the ball and has shown a commitment to doing so. This is it.
Right. He's got 30 years of coaching experience. And what was one of the big questions that consistently came up among many here this year and the last two is, well, what would you say the identity is of this offense? And maybe that was an overplayed concept, but at a place like Wisconsin, that word does matter. And when you go back and listen to Jeff Grimes talk about his offenses, identity is one of the first things that he talks about. It's a physical smash mouth identity, but it's not like it's stuck in 1992 or something like that. Again, there are a lot of passing concepts, and so it's going to be a blend, but the emphasis is run, having a power spread approach. And so this will allow Wisconsin to go back to some of those heavier personnel packages that Luke talked about. Yeah, there's going to be 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers out there, but if you want to have 2 tight ends or 3 tight ends or 2 running backs on the field, this is the guy who knows how to utilize that. And his background, again, is as an offensive line coach, as a run game coordinator. The other thing that I think is interesting about this hire, Zach, is what Luke also talked about. There's going to be an offensive coordinator and there's going to be a quarterbacks coach, because within that resume, nowhere does it say anything about coaching quarterbacks. And so that will be the next domino to fall here, is what does that look like? But obviously this was the first and most important domino that needed to fall for Wisconsin to move forward with its offense.
I think another aspect of this offense, and it's very similar to Phil Longo, but really any successful at least I think any successful offense at Wisconsin is going to have. And certainly when you go through the years of what Jeff Grimes has done, you would say a mobile quarterback also is going to be a part of it. Jalen Daniels did not have the season that a lot of people were hoping for him. And there was initially, right when the story came out, like, oh, well, maybe Jalen Daniels is going to hit the transfer portal. And about 15 minutes, maybe about a half an hour later, it was announced that Kansas had re-signed him to a deal. Now it's possible. It's possible that he was only going to go back to Kansas if Jeff Grimes was not there. I don't know that to be the case whatsoever, but the timing would suggest that there's some interesting timing there. But I think when you look at Jalen Daniels, down the stretch, the final 6 games, he had 3 games where his QBR was over 90, and he got better as the season went on, and his rushing stats also went up as the season went on. So I think when you look at Wisconsin's roster, I don't know that they have necessarily, other than Carter Smith and maybe Mabry, I don't know that they necessarily have the personnel that has succeeded at a high level with Jeff Grimes.
Well, this goes back to why this transfer portal season is going to be so fascinating. We've already seen the Badgers have 13 scholarship players, at least as of this recording and conversation, declare that they're going to go into the portal. And we've talked before that it seems like they're going to need to go to the portal for a quarterback, especially someone with experience, but who could thrive in this type of system. And it goes back in part to what they do with Tyler Van Dyke, which we discussed on the previous show. And he's in a real tough spot. It's not his fault that he tore his ACL, and it's not Wisconsin's fault that they need some reliability at quarterback. But absolutely, I think we're going to be monitoring if there's a transfer portal quarterback available who fits what this is. I certainly think long term, Carter Smith looks very much like a guy who could have success in this type of system. As I said previously, his high school coach describes him as a linebacker who plays quarterback. He plays with physicality. He wants to get out in the run game, but he also can make all the throws all over the field. And that's the kind of quarterback that I think can have success in this type of offense moving forward.
And I also think it's the type of quarterback that Luke Fickell wants too, right? Like I don't think he wants a guy that's a pocket passer. That just, he's a defensive guy. And I don't want to. There have been comparisons made to Gary Anderson just because of how things have gone. Now, Gary Anderson on the field, the team was actually quite successful in those 2 years. Perhaps things were going the wrong way at the end of it, but they were successful. And all he talked about was, we need a guy that can be a dual threat. And I think Luke Fickell's the same way as a defensive coach. How hard that is to deal with on a week-to-week basis, you have to at least have that in your game. And you go back and look at what Phil Longo did in his best offenses. They were quarterbacks that could move. And I think I feel like that's every offense that you can have this year. Or I should say, at this point in college football, and Wisconsin hasn't really had that outside of Tanner Mordecai. And, you didn't get a full year of him. So, I mean, Jack Cohn was an okay guy, but it's not like you would intentionally run him all the time. I mean, there's a great example of why people perhaps weren't expecting him to run at all, and it's the Big 12 title, or excuse me, the Big 10 title game, where he did a little read option, and the hole was just absolutely massive, and he ran for a touchdown because Ohio State didn't think there was any chance he was going to keep the ball, and we knew that this year. Nobody thought Braden Locke was ever keeping the ball, and it makes it pointless outside of, obviously you can pick it up and throw it, but it just makes it pointless not to have that type of guy, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I would agree. You can go back and look at all the quarterbacks who've played meaningful reps here in the last decade plus, and there are not a lot of guys that have fit that skill set. But I mean, that's why Carter Smith drew comparisons to Desmond Ridder when Luke was recruiting and talking to them, why they thought it could be a good fit. You need someone who can do both of those things, and sometimes that's easier said than done. But yeah, if you look at this roster, not a lot of guys necessarily fit that. But yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, and here's the other thing. I think they've got some core pieces to work with. Again, it's making assumptions on who's going to be around, but guys like Vinny Anthony, guys like Will Pauling, Darian Dupree, Dylan Jones, like the offensive line. I think there are some good pieces to work with that can sort of return to the core philosophy that Wisconsin succeeded at for so long.
So you mentioned the quarterback coach. This feels like the offensive coordinator hire was the most important hire, but this quarterback's coach hire feels like a huge hire for Luke Fickell, because I don't know that they have necessarily developed quarterbacks overly well at Wisconsin in the last, 6 years, 7 years. I mean, I think Jack Cohn developed, and maybe Graham Mertz would have been that guy that he was at Florida the next year in 2021. I mean, or at 2023, feels unlikely, but they have not done a very good job developing quarterbacks at Wisconsin, and that's not something that can continue if you're going to try and play at the college football playoff level. And so I think this hire at quarterbacks coach is just massive. And also, what kind of connections does that quarterback have to a potential quarterback that would want to come to Wisconsin as well?
I think that's got to be part of it too, because you need some in or some advantage if you're going to add for a third consecutive offseason a quarterback. But if you're ranking the importance of individual position coaching hires, certainly this one has to rank pretty high up there in recent memory. Now, I think in retrospect, getting a guy like AJ Blazik on the offensive line who can bring some stability as the fourth position coach there in as many seasons, that's right up there. But one of the things that consistently has held Wisconsin back over time, it feels like, is not having that kind of dynamic quarterback. And yeah, no question, this is going to be a critical hire for Luke so that they can move this program forward, because it doesn't matter who your offensive coordinator is. If you've got a quarterback that cannot operate at the highest level, then you're going to be in trouble as an offense.
What do you make of Jeff Grimes' background as an offensive line coach? Do you like it?
I think it's got to appeal to a certain faction of Wisconsin fans for starters. And again, if you want to be more of a power run approach, I'd say that kind of background fits pretty darn well because, yeah, I mean, he's been an offensive line coach at a lot of different schools. And now he's got 7 years of offensive coordinator experience, again, with varying degrees of success, and also has been a run game coordinator. Like those are all the traits that Luke wants to have here. So I think it's certainly a good thing. And maybe that experience can help, I don't know, speed up the process here because he knows what it looks like from an offensive line perspective. So you can coach that in a different way and maybe work both with AJ Blazik and Casey Robach and Devin Spalding in the run game. And I just think that this can help the offense function perhaps more quickly than it would if you didn't have that kind of experience.
Is this a big enough splash hire in your mind? Or does it matter because they made the splash hire last time?
So at this point, I'll just be honest. I think that's completely overrated with where we are in regards to Wisconsin's football program. You know what the splash hire was? Bringing Luke Fickell here and paying him almost $8 million a year and bringing him in instead of a guy like Jim Leonard, who obviously was beloved here. Luke had success. And in 2 years, it has not led to results on the field. He's under 500 since the start of the 2023 season. And so to me, you would have won the news cycle perhaps if you brought in a guy that was a so-called splashy hire. But you know what matters now? Winning freaking football games. And if that's a guy that maybe isn't the most exciting hire, but restores some of the roots before, to me, that's what matters. So like, I think all the splash and stuff was exciting 2 off seasons ago. And now it's about winning football games.
Another thing from my mentions after the news broke was Kansas fans hate him. Baylor fans hate him. BYU fans hate him. Hard pass.
Look, I can't speak to those fan bases and what happened at the previous schools, but obviously, if you had no success ever, you wouldn't keep getting jobs. And all it takes is the right set of circumstances. And again, put up some numbers, put up some good numbers at these places. Look, the Kansas one was a unique spot because you happen to take over for probably one of the best most creative offensive coordinators in college football. Look at what Penn State's doing in year 1 under him. But I'm going to take that with a grain of salt. Now, I think you could also say North Carolina fans said good riddance when Phil Longo left and it didn't work out at Wisconsin. But if you just based it on how fan bases felt, I don't know how many guys you'd end up hiring.
Probably nobody, because there's always fans that are going to be happy with the hire or not happy with the hire. But I will say that while he doesn't have connections to the Midwest, like Kansas is the closest he's gotten to coaching in the Midwest, and we all know that Kansas isn't part of the Midwest. So I shouldn't say that.
Easy, Chief.
The upper Midwest. I should say the upper Midwest. Kansas is not in the Plains.
Kansas is in the Midwest.
Kansas ain't in the Midwest.
Okay, well, they're not in the South, and they're not in the West, so I really don't know.
The Plains, no?
Isn't the Plains directly in the Midwest?
No.
Okay.
I thought the Plains isn't like Oklahoma and that. I mean,
Kansas is in Oklahoma.
It's also not Nebraska.
All right. You know what? For another show, man. You're talking to a guy who grew up in Kansas.
I know. And you guys have
it's not the upper Midwest. That's why the word upper, but it's the Midwest.
It's the warped sense of trying to say that you're like, is Wisconsin a lot like Kansas?
In terms of what, weather?
No.
What are we talking about?
All right, it's not. Like, it's values. Like there's very few. There's very little values. Zero values down there in Kansas. It produces, Jesse's. I'm messing around. But no, it was a joke. It's okay. Calm down. I'm just messing with you. The hire itself, and he doesn't have necessarily the connections here, but he has been to Wisconsin before, and I'm sure fans will remember it because Wisconsin was ranked number 6 in the country and playing BYU, and the BYU offense came in and ran all over Wisconsin. I'm pretty sure that TJ Edwards and I think it might have been Ryan Connolly are still trying to figure out where the ball is, as they ran so many, like the jet sweeps and a lot of misdirection stuff. And they ran for 191 yards, average nearly 7 yards a carry. So he has had success at Camp Randall before.
Well, got that going for him, which is nice.
You're mad at me, aren't you?
No, not really. I just think it's
My
silly.
Kansas thing. Yeah,
You're just
yeah, okay.
wrong. You're just
All right.
wrong. And it's okay
Okay.
to be wrong. I'm just going to
Okay.
say.
All right. If you think so. The other aspect of this, is there anything else you want to touch on, Jeff Grimes?
No, I mean, look, I certainly look forward to learning more and talking to him and getting a better sense, not only of what his offensive philosophy has been in the past, but why he thinks it will work here, all those things. And we're not going to know the answers until certainly next season, but spring practice, so we can actually get a sense of what it looks like. Because, I mean, it really wasn't until the first spring practice under Phil Longo when you saw, okay, look at the speed and the tempo that they're going to attempt to play with. But as of now, it's just kind of, hey, here's what his history has been. Well, I want to know what the future looks like.
Do they put up more than 30 on Miami in the opener? Miami of Ohio in the opener?
Oh my God. I didn't even know that was the first game of the 2025 season. I'm still getting over 2024.
I
You're
just had
really
to
going
go
to
look.
put me,
I
if you're going
had
to
to
put me
go
on the
look at it.
spot here, I'm going to say
more of a-
yes.
Okay.
I thought you were going to ask me if they were going to average more than 30. My answer will be no, but they darn well better average more than 22.6.
Is that what they finished with?
Was it? No, 23.6. How? I apologize. 23.6. I think that's where they're at. It's
I think it was like a half. Was it like a half point more than last year or something like that?
0.1. It was. I think it was 23.5 and then 23.6, which are the worst back-to-back years at Wisconsin since 91-92 in terms of scoring offense. So the bar is pretty low that you got to meet.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right. So Jeff Grimes, and we'll obviously have more to talk about when he's introduced, and Luke Fickell has things to say about him, and obviously the offensive or the quarterback coach thing as well. Before we go, however, Wisconsin also got some good news. I don't know that it was unexpected news, but got some good news yesterday, and maybe this news was also part of Jeff Grimes stuff going. But Riley Mahlman is returning for his senior year, and will lock down, I would assume, right tackle, though who knows? Maybe they want to try him at left. I probably don't see that happening. But Riley Mahlman's coming back, and it means that they should have at least 3 of the 5 starters back along the offensive line.
Yeah, that would be my sense too. Obviously, Joe Brunner at left guard. Jake Renfro's got more eligibility remaining, and when you miss a couple years, I think that's good reason as any to want to come back. And Riley Mahlman, and of course, you still have Kevin Haywood. So like there are a lot of really good building blocks on the offensive line. I know we've talked for years about the talent or the stars and all that, and how it hasn't necessarily come together, but I think that they've got a very good core nucleus on which to build when you're bringing in a guy who can help emphasize some of the things you can do well.
So he is, yeah. So he's back. Riley Mahlman's back. Jake Renfro made it seem, I don't know, when we talked to him before, I think it was before the Nebraska game, he felt pretty confident that he was going to be back. And yeah, then they need to obviously find some more depth pieces. Maybe it's JP Benchall's time as one of the starting guards, because he was the guy that came in. I actually, Jake Renfro got pulled in the Minnesota game. I think they ended up moving Joe Huber over to center, and Benchall slotted in at right guard. So maybe that'll end up being what it is moving forward, but we'll see. You're also going to be writing, because they did lose another member of that 2023 recruiting class, which I believe is down to, is it 4?
There are 4 out of 15 remaining.
Yeah. So James Duran, the offensive lineman, announced his decision to enter the transfer portal. So they're down some guys in that class. But I look at the transfer portal opening up on Monday for Wisconsin. It means they can start adding guys. I know you're probably going to be writing about it. Just real quick primer on what you believe should be added here as Wisconsin looks to try and build on a roster that went 5-7 this past year.
Yeah, I did have a chance to talk briefly to James Durand, and I mean, he was just one of those guys who's caught up kind of in a numbers game when he saw who was going to be coming back. He'd been practicing on the interior as both a center and a guard, and was just not in a spot where he was probably going to be certainly a starter next year. And you're also looking at who's coming in behind you, and there's 10 scholarship guys, and going to be writing something about what the hell happened here to the 2023 recruiting class, because it is fascinating, even if it is guys that generally committed under the previous coaching staff. you had 3 defensive backs who followed Luke Fickell here, and all of them are gone. But this kind of speaks to where we're at in college football. So that's for another day. But in terms of the transfer portal possibilities, we've talked about quarterback. I certainly think you've got to explore that avenue if you want to have some immediate success in year 3. So I'll start there. And really, I just went position by position and was like, here's who they have. Do they need anybody? If you're looking at running back right now, I think it's interesting because as of now, that's 5 scholarship running backs in the room, which is not a particularly large number, especially when you consider a year ago they had 7. Now they lost to Wee Walker and Ches Malusi. Obviously, at one point it looked like they were going to have 8, but they moved Nate White from running back to wide receiver. I think the tricky spot there is, and it speaks to where we're at just in college football. If you were to bring in a portal guy, you'd be saying we're going to take reps away from a guy like Darian Dupree and Dylan Jones, and you feel like they're the backbone for your future. So, I'll be interested to see what happens there. Do they move Jackson Aker to fullback? In which case you're down even another running back. I'm not going to say they need one right now, but that would to me is an interesting position to watch. I think wide receiver, no doubt. They've got 9 scholarship wide receivers, unless they just feel like we're comfortable with that number and it's just a totally different philosophy because they wanted 12 under Phil Longo. But they've lost Trech Kekahuna. They didn't get a 2025 slot receiver who decommitted and flipped to Kentucky. Nate White's gone. I mean, that's at least numbers there. So it's worth exploring there. I think they're set on the offensive line, and at tight end, they've got numbers at least. So that's where I'm at offensively, but certainly interested to hear what your thoughts would be on that side of the ball.
Yeah, I think wide receiver is interesting just because there are 9 guys there, but it's possible that others will leave. I mean, we don't know that, but I look at you talk about the slot. Obviously, Will Pauling going into his final year. I'm a big fan of Kyan Barry Johnson. I think he talent-wise has got a chance to be pretty darn good. He got off to a little bit of a slow start, last year as an early enrollee. And I don't know that he necessarily realized that he needed to go to class on a regular basis. So we understand that has been made clear. And certainly AJ,
Kenny
Guyton, thank you.
Yeah.
I think made that clear to him and then made that clear to us as to why he did not have because everyone else had a motion W on his helmet and he did not. And so he had to earn it. And I think that's, so I think he's certainly going to play a bigger role next year for sure. But you're right. Young guys, I don't know that they have a ton of them anymore.
They have 2 wide receivers in the last, I want to say 3 recruiting classes. Obviously, you have Eugene Hilton Jr. coming in this class who they think can play outside, but potentially in the slot too. We'll see. You have Kyan Barry Johnson. There's not a lot of young guys. Now, there's a lot of veteran guys, which maybe you feel like that's fine. This is a year where we can just lean on them. But I think that's at least they're going to, as Pat Lambert said, they're going to leave no stone unturned. They're going to explore basically every position group and see who's available if they can upgrade.
Yeah, for sure. But again, like the older guys, so you have an older guy in Vinny Anthony, you have an older guy in Will Pauling. You have to think about the future a little bit with it. And those guys obviously will be gone after next year. And, Quincy Burrows coming up. And, what does Chris Brooks have a role here? I think he will, just because of the physical nature of which he can play. I think it's going to fit well with this new offense. But there's, and Joseph Griffin. And
CJ Williams,
Tyrell Henry, there are names here that we haven't seen a ton of football from that maybe we'll get to see, right? I don't know. That one is the only one that's a huge question. And then maybe instead of getting a transfer portal running back that you're expected to play right away, maybe it's a developmental guy, maybe further down. And how many of those guys are out there? Probably not a ton, but you just never know. Quarterback certainly at the top of the list. And then for you defensively, I mean, it's got to be defensive line, right?
If that, I mean, it's not an if. That's number one. You damn well better find some defensive linemen here because you've lost 3 in terms of transfer portal guys. You lost James Thompson Jr. I know he didn't play much this year with the torn pectoral, but that was a guy that had 18 starts in his career and was a veteran, had another year left. Kurt Neal was a starter. Obviously, you lost Hank Weber as well, and now he didn't play. But again, if you're just looking at numbers in your defensive line room, You've got that. You lose Elijah Hills. I mean, Ben Barton could come back, but that's why, the first known portal offer, and again, window doesn't open until Monday, but it was a defensive lineman from Northwest Missouri State, which is a Division II school. Guy was a 3rd-team all-conference performer, But I think this is the problem with D-line in general is we've talked about it. It's like one of the hardest positions to try to recruit, certainly out of high school, and everybody wants it in the portal. That's why I think Wisconsin ended up with 2 FCS level players that they brought up. You also will have Brandon Lane, should be maybe have a bigger role next season as well. But that's number one. So absolutely D lineman. The linebacker spots, I don't know. I mean, look, they've got 6 inside linebackers on scholarship, which is I think the same number they had the year before. You're losing Jaheim Thomas and Jake Chaney, but you're bringing in a couple inside linebackers in Mason Posa and Cooper Catalano, and I think Posa's got a real chance to be special. Look, Catalano's the state's all-time leading tackler, so I think it's like Tackett Curtis and Christian Allegro, and you're building around those 2 guys on the outside. You're bringing in 3, and you're bringing a guy like Jalen Williams, and maybe he plays earlier, so I don't necessarily expect it there, but the secondary to me is absolutely where you're going to have to add cornerback. They've lost every cornerback ever, it feels like. I mean, they've lost half a dozen cornerbacks from the 2023 class, and 5 of them, well, I guess I should say defensive backs. But 3 cornerbacks are out the door. And so absolutely that's number one. And safety too. And maybe some of this depends on what's Preston Zachman going to do, but you've lost Braden Moore, which I think is a pretty sizable loss. You've lost Justin Taylor. You've got Hunter Wooler out the door, guys like Kamoi Latu. So I think that's where I would start is defensive line and in the secondary.
Absolutely. I would agree with all of those, and we'll see how it plays out here as the portal for Wisconsin, at least to be able to add some guys back in where everyone's kind of freaking out. Oh, everyone's out the door. There will be guys coming in. There will be plenty of guys coming in, and maybe there'll be upgrades and maybe they won't be. But a lot of the guys that are out the door, we haven't seen play. So I don't know. We can sit here and talk about how big of a loss a certain guy is other than it's a number. So anything else?
No, that's how I would look at it too. I'm not going to sit here and say the sky is falling because this is a massive number. Wisconsin's season also happened to end earlier than a lot of these other teams where guys are still going to go. But when you're trying to put together a roster and construct it and you're missing a dozen scholarship opportunities, then you're going to have plenty of room to fill.
I mean, it is interesting that Wisconsin's lost, was it 12? Is it 12 or 13 scholarship guys at this point?
I think it's 13.
Okay. I saw Purdue had lost 15 and they fired their head coach. So again, at Purdue, there may be not necessarily enough talent. They may not want to jump in the portal because they may not find something better. A lot of Wisconsin guys, at least recruiting wise, coming in, pretty highly ranked guys. And I would assume are going to find soft landing spots, specifically a Braden Moore type of guy who I still think could be a pretty darn good player, but we'll see. We'll be back next week, talk about it, but wanted to step in and discuss Jeff Grimes a little bit. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is. Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.